Anyone not ready?
It doesn't make sense for you to compete against this New York vibe to get your whole body tense. Calm down, listen to a brother who knows. But the rappers out here come up with mad different types of flow. Switch it up, change it up.
New York City, the city that never sleeps unless it's got the right indica in it. While weed might not be legal in New York City just yet, many New Yorkers proudly inhale and flaunt their cannabis use. More people get high in New York City than any other city. It's just more difficult for New Yorkers to be open about it. Fortunately, approximately 20 medical marijuana facilities will serve patients in 2014. In our dream world, there will be a dispensary on every corner right next to NYC's bodegas. We're here to help make that pipe dream a reality. Justin Hartfield, CEO of WeedMax. This ad and its mission statement are part of a constellation of discourses in the contemporary American debate about marijuana. The arguments of advertisers and their ability to use rhetoric to sway the public acts as a point of entry for analysis of the value-based appeals and subtle manipulations of power that define the very contours of America as a political battlefield. Reframing pot as a mainstream drug, WeedMax says, we're really trying to do it in a really professional, highbrow manner. It's not just stoners, it's professional people. This is about liberty. Justin Hartfield and his new wave of stoner profiteerism are an appeal to a vision or ideograph of America that fundamentally refuses to confront the rotting body of American politics and civic life. It paints with the colorful language of diversity and progressivism, invoking a dream world where weed shops pop up next to the bodega on the corner, and a friendly hipster engages, greets you with bong in hand to sell you locally grown pot. It appeals to a dream that many marijuana users share, but plays on the ideological disconnect between the dream and the white supremacist neoliberal machinery that will be trafficked in to realize it. Humphreys 11. A legal marijuana industry would be corporate dominated. A legalized marijuana industry would look like big tobacco. Marijuana production may simply be the visions of big tobacco companies. Our predictions aren't particularly insightful. They don't rise above common sense. The shape of corporate America isn't hard to discern. Misimaginings of legalized cannabis are a consequence of the cultural meaning cannabis has. Both sides misimagine the legalized marijuana industry made of bucolic co-op farms run by hippies in tie-dye t-shirts, selling pot at the lowest possible profit to friendly independent business folks who set aside 10% of their profits to save the whales. The current generations of Americans don't know Woodstock from chicken stock. If the U.S. legalized marijuana today, fading cultural meanings would rule the day. Fading cultural meanings would not rule the day. Capitalism would. People in the marijuana industry would wear suits, work in offices, and donate to the Club for Growth and ally with the tobacco industry. The liberal grandchildren of legalization advocates will grumble about the soulless marijuana corporations, and the conservative grandchildren of anti-legalization activists will play golf at the country club with marijuana executives, toast George Soros on the 19th hole afterwards, and discuss how they too can get the goddamn liberals in Congress to stop blocking capital gains tax cuts. The power of rhetoric of drugs lies in its ability to fill in this gap of language with implied cultural meaning. WeedMax sells its product by exaggerating the compatibility of weed with the productive ethos of capitalism. We're trying to be really inclusive by making marijuana really happy, fun medicine. That's why our logo is a smiley face. We're professionals and we smoke weed all the time. You can do both now in 2014. While historically the mainstream narrative about marijuana has been a propagandist campaign of demonization, the less rhetorical strike back has generated new waves of contestation over the ideographs contained within marijuana. Discursive appeals to the values of family, self-restraint, and civil moderation abound on billboards, radio commercials, television, and computer screens as rhetoric circulate like viruses. Here, a father and son stand next to each other next to the words, "Please guard my son." The comparison to alcohol is an incredibly common trope, a reference to the imperative to drink and use responsibly. These ads appeal to a white American middle class that imagine a copacetic future where marijuana use and sales is casual as alcohol and joints are sold in Marlboro packs with an FDA stamp on them. To combat the fascist Patrick Kennedy and the conservatism of Sam, the left has inverted the appeal of anti-marijuana ads to the ideograph of productivity and motivation by selling weed as a professional drug, a happy medicine that distances itself from being a drug at all and becomes an acceptable ideological release valve of the working class, like happy hour or going to a strip club. The message is clear. Weed isn't a violent drug. It's an acceptable distraction from the reality of American life, just like alcohol. Weed becomes something that can be to the use of the economy, a tool for eliminating crime instead of an object of criminal behavior. In fact, marijuana is advertised as a legal panacea for America's economic failures, with states like California, Colorado, and Washington all saving their state budgets through taxation of production and sale. At previous conferences, we have focused on the more overt racist connections between government propaganda and the advertising strategies of Coca-Cola and the whitened sexuality that lies behind their rhetorical appeals. At the UMKC conference, we focused on the historical racism of the laws behind marijuana prohibition and criticized the power of their rhetorical architect, Henry Anslinger. At the Weber conference, our presentations focused more on the subtleties of whiteness and reproduction as it impacts the modern in representation as it impacts the modern pushback against legalization through tropes of motivation, responsibility, family, order, and society. Now marijuana rhetoric has evolved from an explicitly white supremacist display of institutional values to a multicultural, it's 2014, dude, postmodern rhetoric of comfort, consumption, and happiness. Similar to Coke's turn from overtly racist advertising strategies that appeal to white supremacist culture of America, big marijuana has transitioned to the more subtle whiteness of a globalized neoliberal multiculturalism. They appeal to an image of a united world beyond the strife of history where people of any race or culture can share a joint and a Coke. The territorial conflicts between these ideographs seem to reveal one thing. The legalization of weed looms inevitably on the horizon. In fact, it is already in motion. And although the rhetoric of the emerging marijuana industry is in its infancy, its rhetorical strategies of appeal and our ability to predict them will lie at the crucial center of any politics that seeks to resist the structures of American domination and power. Given the trajectory of modern legalization, the rhetorical strategies of big marijuana reflect a Coca-Cola meets Monsanto ethos that promises to integrate the culture of marijuana smoothly into the machinery of a world run by 1% of its population. Jerome writes, how does one account for the lack of public outcry? This juxtaposition of raw revere and power and greed is already mentioned in the mainstream media in conjunction with the deep suffering and misery experienced by millions. A generation of youth who have now become a zero generation, marked by a social condition which is more liquid, less definitive, and punitive, and in the end, more death-dealing. This is the current direction of the marijuana movement, enclosed by neoliberal white supremacy and a pickup in the momentum of the status quo. We must confront the rhetorics of drugs in order to change the values behind the politics of marijuana legalization. Calhoun 14. This is the state-controlled dream of political progressives. At the root of the movement is an ethos of paternalism. Weed must only be legal under the condition that the government can act as a partner and that it can put it in the hands of responsible retailers. Big marijuana is born. Legalization seems much more like neoliberal privatization. Legalization picks the winners of the weed market from those who are lucky enough to not find themselves on the wrong side of the law and who already have access to the capital to invest. We fight an uphill battle against the incredible damage the state does. This is the current direction of the marijuana movement in this country. It is towards the centralization and exclusion. This can be changed. We must confront myths about the dangers of drugs and how they need to be controlled by those the state deems responsible. The 1AC asks a bold but difficult question that will not come with an easy answer. Given the momentum of the hulking neoliberal and white supremacist apparatus of American imperial power and violence, what can a person in our position actually do? What futures exist beyond the horizon of the rigged game of American politics? Giroux continues. Against the politics of disimagination, young people need to develop a new language of radical reform. The left must once again offer to young people, people of color, women, activists, places to learn about how the capitalist system works. It must ask in the moment of U.S. global hegemony, what are the alternatives to the cruel power over our lives? Radical theory and practice are inextricably linked. Knowledge without action is impotent, but action without knowledge is ignorant. This imagination must combat the very time and space politics is built upon. Elements of such a utopian imaginary can be found. We must now use time creatively and forever realize that the time is always right to do right. Now is the time to make real the promise of democracy. The radical imagination waits to be unleashed through social movements in which injustice is put on the run, and civic literacy, economic justice, and collective struggle once again become the precondition for agency, hope, and struggle over democracy. Chris and I believe that marijuana should not be illegal in the United States. What this statement means is a question of imagination. The Hasidim tell a story about a world to come that says everything there will be just as it is here. Just as our room is now, so it will be in the world to come. Everything will be as it is now, but just a little bit different. And offering a vision of a world to come that is intimately connected to our world, that seems to foreshadow the possibility of changing our world, even if only a little. Political time must be conceived of messianically. The transformation of politics in America cannot be conceived of linearly without falling back onto the imperatives of the ruling class. Our rhetoric must break down the very conceptions of progress in order to enter into politics. Ware explains, what the ruling class sees as a chain of events justified in the name of progress, the historical materialist sees as a single catastrophe, nothing less than the history of the oppressed people. These concepts of progress and objective time are but tools for the ruling class. We can no longer view history as a chronological order, but as a constellation that can rearrange itself in a flash. Construction eclipses causality. The 1AC is an intellectual activity of resistance. Our affirmation is not a roadmap for legalization, but a problematization of the world as is. The 1AC's burden is not to lay down the law for the law, but to spark a conversation about legalization. Bid motion 11. Foucault explained that his role as an intellectual is not to prescribe solutions, but to open up conversations. Those who work in the prison are not likely to find instructions that tell them what is to be done, but my project is precisely to bring about that they no longer know what to do, so that acts, gestures, discourses that open up then, had seemingly gone without saying, have become problematic. What is to be done ought not be determined above by reformers. Critique should be an instrument for those who resist. It does not have to lay down the law from the law. Law for law.
Great.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So if I read reasons why marijuana should not, or why marijuana should still be illegal, is that responsible to you?
Are you saying criminalization good is net ground?
Yeah. Yeah. If I make arguments why we should still be criminalized.
Criminalization good is net ground.
Yes, tentatively. It depends what your link argument is.
Okay.
If you read a link argument that's like the stat, if your DA is like neoliberalism will happen because of legalization, that's the advantage we have. We obviously dispute the link for that.
Okay, obviously. But if I have other than like saying weed legalization causes neoliberalism, right? I can read this.
Yeah, we'll debate.
Okay. Why does voting affirmative help make marijuana dispensaries a reality? I guess like what is the political language that voting aft endorses?
Well, we think instead of like, we think that our criticism of the status quo political language is a reformulation of radical thought, as per the Jerome.
Right. What does that language become? I guess. What is that radical thought?
A vision of the future that is what the Hasidim would call like the world today, but just a little bit different. Our argument is that people in the status quo say there are only two futures that are possible, one where the status quo continues.
So I guess how is the future just a little bit different? What's that?
Well, we think that the looming uniqueness question of neoliberal convergence on the question of weed could be a little bit different.
That little bit different is part of Benjamin's thought experiment. He says that it's impossible to conceptualize what the first step to that little bit different would actually be, because it's actually such a monumental change.
So you don't know what that little bit different is.
I mean, we have a vision of politics, but part of our argument is that that vision of the future of politics is more important than how we get there.
Yeah, what is that vision?
That vision is a future where marijuana is not illegal, but we also don't engage in sort of the neoliberal enclosure of that legalization.
I guess you talk about a need to imagine things. What does that mean?
Like Chris was just talking about, imagining the future as a little bit different.
Okay,
It's what
so
Benjamin calls messianism.
What does the ballot do? Like, why vote F? Like, it seems like you read the one you see. Like, you read the one you see. Like, you have reasons why the vision is a good idea. Why do you need the ballot to like be a referendum on that?
What do you mean need the ballot?
I think the ballot should go to the team that wins the debate.
Okay.
I think we made good arguments.
Okay. I guess my last question then is, what is the impact of the affirmative? Like, why do we need to have this new vision?
Neoliberal control over the population.
Okay.
And corporatism.
All right, so just like neo and bad kind of stuff.
I mean, I guess to just like reduce it to neo, that is a little reductionist,
Sure.
but like the way that American politics, the violence of the structures of American institutions is all part of sort of what we're criticizing.
Okay.
We believe that the status quo and the way it impacts the lives of people is sort of impacting.
Cool. Sure.
Y'all is emailing time?
Robert, I don't have internet on my laptop.
I have a note thread.
I would prefer to.
Yeah.
Just do that.
Also, do you mind cleaning off your orange chair so I can use it to speak from?
Oh yeah.
Your orange chair.
I didn't even, I became accustomed to them.
It's gonna be all loud and
Like,
How to jump it's 2 hours in case.
I'm running stickers.
Stick at exactly the right amount.
Is this? Sam, you want to see?
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay. You might just it should just be called one C.
If I had a flash drive like this, I'd only use it when I was in
It was my debater of the weekend award. Very protective of the jump drive.
Nice.
Later of the weekend.
Yeah, we like, so the team's so big now that we give out awards to people, and I got one.
I love that. That's awesome.
To be fair, Nick gave it to me, so I'm not exactly sure what
Still
he
counts. Your graduation.
You good?
Yeah.
First of all, Kelly, ladies and requires specific regulation. The act is decreasing dates 10 legalization feels looking for prohibiting advanced legalization, incorporates legalization, also entails some sort of legal regulation. Vote negative, two reasons. First, ground up legalization policy never prepared to go for our mainland off the often to disaster regulation. Third, two would be concurrent because that's mainland offense and education as from defending illegal action, then defending the legalization policy act and cites this interconstitutional resolution, which is legalization versus decriminalization of marijuana movement stale generic education, which is applicable to any type of next opposite dissatisfied pharmaceutical industries or covered to your stagnation now scale 14 breaking new drug improvement regarding productivities and bringing new form of consistent forecast the world, which sales success with CEO and trillion dollars this round, this group of success of welcome you after 2 years to stagnation and the plain as success of marijuana trades off the pharmaceutical industry thing in 12 pharmaceutical like marijuana American pad don't have the option to medical alternatives products and taking these from political capital so big pharmaceutical marijuana companies are massive like another expensive pills and caused by trends and color one the biopharmaceutical sector for child death to require multiple research produce vaccines and journals that are disciplined to increase the sensitive capability to assess law enforcement and that's misleading scenario for teaching math and 7 current to remain behind person now to ensure drugs and those is monitoring the working major and have exponential effect on population case good case teaching first continue nice from us now sacrifice that we must have sacrificed individuals from recommended assistance solely the one who must be responsible acting taking calculated situation but only one life from the way of cost and our actions so the rational solution to limit all masculine for life and may have sacrificed some say many and living during value life quality the pleasure from all awareness of this cultural cause and all conscious things of things good pleasure core professions and select something that came from life living pleasure love living pleasure plus a primary logical reason to articulate foundation to creation or the good of pleasure from living life will continuously pursue the least for the sake of preserving the possibility of finding that good and realism and inevitable there and force states of the offensive realism Jackson anarchists fundamental cost of government and states and charter for the other addition to ensuring security charter from the charter back powerful military aggression evolutionary to the right division right attacking the offensive realism press the everything the evolution of anarchy and the right environment receive was a foundation for the group of sneakers and vision to slam our leaders with the realistic spec and there's no recall sharp pressure and 10 political life compass and ideological dual theory and all evolution that approach the problem with the resistance of Western philosophy and science until the account of everything shown that the woman that could just have complexity and no error replication Jen Smith 11 the critical theory nation student general theory based in trade by a lot of trials everything you need to substitute for philosophy and new transformation transforming possibility such that only for the daily ways of favorite set ideological problem from the animal present health and such as competed fallacy and false conscious certainty that we're going to critically initially has their understanding sort of ideology and dominance and they get co-opted occupied UC Berkeley 9 let's talk about finance but also the ground actually delivering most of the capitals and mess and billion affiliate apparatus possibly investment management special debt service at the Mexican job for debt subscription which for your cloud feeder plan to university grading which produces discourse shape desires from the instruction with except for the same quality product which we produce and we produce this discourse which leaves solution and is only words of mad power leaves the mental death of pain and mutual self-thought and action and no alternative living socialist agree this is right and 7 there was a time when intellectual on the left were controversial right for alternatives there's the difference in the left and the left and social knowledge necessity marketable logic behind that is a neoliberalism inevitable no alternative economic system Jones and local half the globalization movement the lack of alternative neoliberal no with no clear political direction movements of wind for culture remains just never in the economic crisis led to a resurgence around the data that doesn't even seem to be alternative the right to being purpose on the right there are the new regular globalization repeated to beat some of the trial by the trade union movement and England was key to space exploration Ashwad and 10 of course I mean years until for our restricted planet Earth result would be collapse resource Earth limit of the solar system or greater in order for the native to make Earth and primary mechanism must be placed in direct most sequence capital needs or continuous expansion makes it appropriate and solves extinction variant shots have caused that cause extinction this is bad it solves inevitable variant shots that cause extinction this is right what's working. The dinosaurs split up in system by already go underground position here is best explanation the death of dinosaurs not only mass extinction there have been 40 alongside the potential flood all the solid meteor impact and the chances to red stream lava from your field between chick for the thick remove content produce catastrophic gas explosion trigger damages 11 earthquake and turning to 20 gauge for the rock and test ice cream dust wood blow out the sun and half prevent global wars routine to those who respect individual rights political economic preference only to ensure that people have capacity to surround examples of health and spread to spread free trade across global negatively of peace relations among the many nations agree. Truth about mechanism for call the criminals for peace, lesson one, peace part two. Capitalism, insecurity, and environmental degradation are self-correcting to maintain the profit motive is key to Johnson 10. Research along a lot of these areas are interaction results in the present and reflect the scarcity of resources and appropriate measures of firms as long as the long-term probability of failures are too weird and self-effective firms to survive. Firm survival is dependent on the capacity of its employees to create as much value as possible, and it is more appropriate to focus on eliminating waste and pollution efficiencies for losing return. Just elimination of also determines the impact the impact of the economic growth, the environment, including the concentration of factors higher in the USSR, by the fact that the former GDP was only half of the property actors and cause a powerful incentive to aggressively increase the efficiency of material steam price for any reason, not only the encouraging the to use more effectively efficient, but all available for substituting most resources there is sustained demand and instability development new puts in some combination of advantages and it's key to value life rock on to the market freedom, prosperity, free market, all raw material prosperity, all of our leisure time, our health and longevity, capitalism, security, human capital protects and becomes strong, very choice, and opportunity, the past ones had no choice to live, no choice to live in the state of dependency, and there are who are hacks who don't understand the system, just right between money tolerance and setting collection about capitalism because it's how they tell them to build terrorism and from their child to the excelling in school only to find later in life their market values much lower than they believe, much lower than they believe, or no people in the global capital system, no be rather particular know that this particular object is written for intellectual capitalism the redundant and these conditions for subsidy or no return runaway consumers were signified and take capital preservation in science and test after critical analysis and leads and hints the way to uncover false impressions about innovation and individuals for to get the educated individuals from widely varied backgrounds for such innovations will need to support the education for individuals of all from all walks of life necessary by practice will be the creation of critical thinking individuals who question capitalist fetishes.
Go back to the incentive.
The risk is higher. Defenses are not good enough because the only way to stop it, the only way to stop this tax from causing life or damage by entering pharmaceuticals, strong Scotland. And third, team the risk that works into the United States cavalry fears of the vulnerability to our vulnerability to these terrorists has terrorist acts and perfect time push promotion knowledge to address biological agents spread from person to technical needs to harness any tools and trade for the instruction that can be found in a rogue regimes good for these models for deadly names such areas are no longer impossible and new tactics are technical capabilities to deliver bioweapon talent and 8 semester experts are turn the terrorism and combined bioweapons and numerous evidence such as they are wrongfully as we anticipated purpose and outside fundamental organizations have overly proclaimed the intention to use bioweapons outside scales when reporting to be acquired passes on the Taliban fall the biological weapons last in Afghanistan test positive for anthrax and it's irresponsible to assume that the threat of small discount and a very fast taking by becomes a bit easier for them to inflict mass death and bioweapons offer remarkable potential. We would be responsible for the radical jihadists like Al-Qaeda have ignored said potential. Go to case again. There's only a risk of dissent turns the case out the other way around. Goldstein and one of the understanding more multidisciplinary, multi-level, multi seconds, in case of one thing the cost of war, person risking something injustice, causality, friends, strong the other way, war is not a product of any single cost war, has to do with sustained these injustice and emphasis on justice, the same cost of war seems to be empirically inadequate and root cause claims of violence that there's just create more violence, turns case off shreds, and to each person potentially a single compromise proceedings and treatment violent manner, where social origin like what could be wrong with using the violence for the purpose of obtaining peace and survival, claim chain of reason, whatever right origin is those violence committed to achieve peace and single philosophical life. So the question of violence can never be more than partial. Yeah.
Just give me 1 second. I'm reorganizing my document. All right. Do you mind if I sit out while evidence I want?
No, it's totally fine.
All right, you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Thing 12. The plan estimates those efforts. Marijuana trades off with the pharmaceutical industry. It's evidence is 2 lines that says pharmaceutical interests would like to keep marijuana legal so Americans don't have the option of cheap medical alternatives to their products. Do you think you're advocating an ethical position by reading this part?
I think that avoiding bioterrorism makes it ethical.
All right, let's talk about the second piece of evidence. Kelvin 01. You said that causes bioterrorism. Whole piece of evidence. The biopharmaceutical sector is a crucial ally in efforts to prevent bioterrorism. Must perform research, produce vaccines, and join with other disciplines to create sensing capabilities to assist law enforcement.
Yes.
Do you have any piece of evidence talking about how the app would prevent this sort of interdisciplinary
Sure, we think.
engagement over sensing technology.
Sure, the FANG evidence in also the TPL evidence indicates that legalizing marijuana crushes the pharmaceutical industry, means that it can't be involved in the sensing
Do you
way
have a
the same
single,
way.
okay, that's cool. I know you have the word crushes in the tag, but do you have any highlighted word in any of these two pieces of evidence that says kills industry?
We think, let's see.
I can read you the whole thing.
Sure, I mean, I guess it doesn't say kills
No,
industry,
it
but it
doesn't
definitely says
say
it trades
anything
off
to
with every
Alright.
type of, like,
Let's talk about-
the pharmaceutical
Let's talk about the
industry
case
uses,
of the
like,
week. Now, I'm reading this Comiskey 96, tagged extinction first.
Yeah.
Casal 08, living guarantees value to life. It seems to me like if we combine these two arguments, it would say that the drug war is just, even if it keeps incarcerating millions of black and brown people, as long as it prevents extinction. Would you agree with that statement?
I guess I don't understand how that combination leads to that.
Okay, if extinction comes first and living guarantees value to life, if someone who is currently incarcerated for smoking a joint asks you to, change the law, you could then tell them, you're still alive, you have value to
That
life.
would necessitate the
Right.
claim that the war on drugs is key to stopping extinction, which we have never made.
That's true.
Okay, that's fine. Realism inevitable, Thayor 04. Why does this mean that other people aren't inevitably going to develop bioterroristic weapons?
Right,
That's all right.
so that's definitely the argument. The pharmaceutical industry is key to stop those.
Okay, so you think,
People who are
so
developing
the American pharmaceutical industry
Right, you read the
has,
line in the part that talks about why
I
it's
have to
not
finish
important.
asking this big question. The American pharmaceutical industry
Yes.
is so powerful that they will be able to develop the techniques to stop the entire global trend towards increasing bioweaponization only if marijuana remains illegal.
Sure, the counter
Yes.
evidence that you read back to me indicates that pharmaceutical industry is key to join with other groups to stop this,
Okay,
i.e. stopping the
all right,
global
let's
There's
go
just one distinction I
All
want to make real quick, is that we are not saying that we prevent other actors from making bioweapons. We're saying that the pharmaceutical industry is key to making the vaccines that prevent those.
All right, that's cool. That's not what your evidence says. Is capitalism good or bad?
Good.
Good.
Sorry.
Okay.
It's good.
Your piece of Occupy UC Berkeley 09 evidence comes from the website anticapitalprojects.wordpress.com.
Yeah,
Should you
they-
lose for reading contradictory arguments?
No, that's not a contradictory argument. That's
Okay,
the argument that
So
the
then
you
this
presented
argument,
the one
so
C
then,
needs to
so
be
then this
never
argument is saying that capitalism causes corruption,
No,
correct?
it's not.
It does not. Okay.
Liberation time?
Pretty good.
Gotta get the crucial distinction of whether you think happens good or bad.
I'll just use that.
Sorry.
It's a little taller than my notes. Hold on. There is a lot going on in the case debate, so I'm gonna do T first.
Okay.
Then I'm gonna go to the big farm this end, and then the case on one.
I think, hard to get your record right, and don't want to see again, so don't rule out from the ground last.
Thank you.
We all set? Your piece of 1NC interpretation evidence has no intent to define the affirmative as a form of legalization because without laws on the books, something is legal. You have not encountered the core concept of the topic, which is that there is decriminalization, which would be removing some of the laws that exist, but removing all of the laws that are on the books in the status quo would be a form of full libertarian legalization. Now, even if the affirmative were not advocating this, we're still in advocacy of a future in which marijuana is not criminalized, which is a core argument of the topic. We're in the direction of the topic. Rhetoric that we use to shape the linguistic structure of debate itself should be open to criticism. Framework wields the ideograph of fiat as a weapon of imagination that exerts power and influence on the body of thought that is debate. It shapes its contours and its limits. These limits are a constantly negotiated set of power relations. Fiat as an ideograph is composed of memories, images, and affective tethers to concepts ordered in the infancy of our times in debate. Fiat brings back novice lectures, debate theory, and planned debate. Fiat is an imaginative tool that debate uses to allow students to speculate about their thought. This should not be constrained to any one model of education or simulation, despite the individual merits of any of them. Framework is an ideological predisposition toward one method of education. You should prefer a permutation of methods. Swenson in 2008. No word is entire of itself. All words are part of main ideology, materialist theory, philosophy, and mythos, thought theory, not contradictory.
prescription social consciousness to philosophy seek to describe God in the future, the material, this involved in the ideograph, because rhetorical theory is not valuable as assumptions guide direct theorizing, not providing a heuristic framework. We must decipher which heuristic framework offers the highest quality perspective explaining a given phenomenon. I propose problematization rather than specific answers. I do not seek a totalizing methodological conclusion, but rather a domain of acts, practices, and thoughts that pose a problem for politics. Both the material and symbolic presuppositions presuppose a fundamental falsity of metaphors, such coordinates, and subtle connection between the material and symbolic systems. McGee describes the ideograph as the trick of the mind that leads us into believing what we think with through force. Society in which we belong, the rhetorical force, the ideograph must be taken as the center of origin, human control, power, both external forces which allow rhetoric through ideographic usage cause ideology. Ideographs are paramorphic, retain a formal categorical meaning, constant reference to its history. As an ideograph, all same kernel meaning is always understood in relation to another interpenetrating system or structure of public motives. Such structures appear to be diachronic and synchronic patterns. Political consciousness have capacity to shape and control power and influence, not determine the shape and texture of each individual's reality. When was the structure of ideographs created so that they could gain powers, rhetorical forces, the appeals to history, defining an ideograph, real discourse, they are forces, the ideograph descriptive and essentially social human condition. We saw all their stasis arguments, Steinberg and Freely 2008, another way to approach theodicy, consider early agency and vote by the debaters, activists, and advocates, such as approach to traditional use of theodicy, hypothetical judgments, the affirmative claims not become reality, watch agency of power, the debaters, as advocates, is to influence the participants in the immediate debate itself. Debate is advocacy, focus on participants, a decision rendered by the judges about the debaters rather than the hypothetical plan. They are debating critical and philosophical implications to the rules and context of debate itself, and the underpinnings of the structural framework, policy, advocacy, and debate practice are all subject to debate. Now the farm is sad. The link is pain pills. The affirmative is not a trade-off with that. What is your time frame argument for the affirmative? We have not envisioned a change that happens tomorrow, or rather an abstract vision of the future, a form of ideological divergence from the undercurrents that exist in the status quo that are fundamentally formed by the rhetoric that exists on the left and the right in terms of marijuana legalization. You can see much of the thesis of the affirmative as well as not engaging our particular rhetorical artifacts the way that we have outlined. The Weed Maps campaign for legalization is part of the vision for the future, that there can be a copacetic, liberal, postmodern future in which we can go down to the corner and buy weed from the shop next to the bodega from a hipster who donates to community farms. The 1AC is not a decimation of the pharmaceutical industry. There's no internal link magnitude in the context of your uniqueness evidence, because your link evidence just says that people might not buy Vicodin and might buy weed. And instead, I don't know anyone who has a severe back condition that suffers from pain that would say that they could smoke a joint instead of taking Vicodin in order to deal with daily suffering. However, your fortune cookie evidence has no warrants that actually get you anywhere, because it doesn't actually implicate that the industry itself would collapse, just that there might be some profit loss. You need to read evidence that says that profit loss is key to the industry, which you have not. They shouldn't get any warrants in the block because it's sandbagged for 1AR. Neither of us are particularly fast. We don't have the ability to read a ton of cards on this. Now, the link is not intrinsic to the 1AC. We do not believe that imagining a future in which marijuana is not criminalized forces you to also imagine a future in which the pharmaceutical industry is unable to make medicine to treat things like Ebola or other shit. There's no impact to your value and profits argument because they're not key to vaccines, which is your internal link to bioterror. Vaccine demand is inevitable because there is disease. You should reject their impact argument because bioterrorism is unlikely. Multiple obstacles still were in 2006. Each of these steps were significant rules. Terrorists requiring an agent which is robust for storage, production, transport, dispersal, inflict mass casualties, very difficult, requires substantial financial, logistical, technological, devoting billions of dollars a year. Research dispersal still challenge U.S. and Russian scientists. Unlikely terrorists have the means of preparing biological agents and science very costly there. There's no other terrorist group known to successfully culture pathogen Al-Qaeda favors simple attacks to generate cost fear, low cost to have biological weapons exist for bioterrorism. This low terrorist organizations like the expertise, logistics, equipment, bioterror tech. There's no imminent threat of bioterror now. Your framing of bioterror without a particular scenario as a threat to life enables the state's acquisition of biopolitical control thacker. In 2007, Foucault's points about biopolitics in most resonance in current context bioterrorism must be some set of conditions to be identified as the threat, such as that a corresponding state of emergency containing the formal decentralized apparatus of biopolitics. Somebody constricts the exception of sovereignty where wars are no longer waged in the name of a sovereign. They wage on behalf of the existence of everyone. Entire populations mobilized for the purpose of wholesale slaughter in the name of life. Massacres have become vital now. The case outweighs, they don't have any impact uniqueness for their argument. Neoliberalism is overwhelmingly destroying both the environment and the political sphere. The fact that no matter how you vote in America, the president has the same policies. The government does not change from a result of political engagement, which means that the only way to steer off an inevitable course towards extinction that exists in the status quo is to reclaim that ground for politics, the structure overdetermines all of your particular scenarios and makes it inevitable. Neoliberalism results in things like biopiracy, the patenting of the genetic code. Monsanto is particularly responsible for global environmental destruction, disease, and poverty. The dissent is an unethical form of logic that allows you to abstract the threat of bioterror and ignore the subtle suffering that exists under the surface of ideology in American society that allows you to say that even though there is a racist war on minorities that exists in the status quo, that as long as there is a larger risk of bioterror, that makes your advocacy ethical, allows you to distance yourself from the particular people affected by the law and instead think only about the abstract terrorist groups that pose a threat to us. Now the case debate, they say extinction first. That does not make much sense here. The 1AC is is a grounded question politically for us as individuals in the academy. What is an individual capable of doing to change the future? You can ask you're asking policymaker questions that are not useful to us in conducting our everyday micro-political life. The dailiness of politics is an impact that should come before the impact frame for their evaluation of politics. This is not a question of hypothetical scenario enactment, but what vision for the future is best. This is what our piece of Van Motion, our piece of Van Motion evidence, as well as our WHERE evidence outlines in the 1AC. There must be a utopian imagination of a future that it's possible that we can break from, that allows us to engage in a form of politics, a living of life that is not constrained by the undercurrents of rhetorical ideology that shape our understanding of the world. They say life leads to value. Life, okay, realism exists. They have also read that card. It doesn't take out the no root cause. This evidence doesn't mean anything for this debate, even if there are approximate causes. That we don't have to win one thing as a root cause, just that there are particular structures that
Dude, if there's no root cause, then all of their neo-living cap terms don't make any sense.
That's true too. If there's no root cause, they don't have any arguments for why cap solves war, cap solves the environment. There is no error. They say no error replication. Okay, Occupy UC Berkeley does not turn the case. In fact, it links to you more because you are academic conservatives who are defending neoliberalism in the academy. You are the pure example of what they would refer to as dead politicians. Now, the neoliberalism and inevitable evidence, we would criticize inevitability claims in the 1AC. The piece of Giroux where the piece of the Giroux and the WHERE evidence makes an epistemology this argument that says that you must be able to imagine yourself out of this future. The ideology of capitalism creates an understanding socially that there is no way to escape it, and breaking from that epistemological blinder is the necessary prerequisite to politics. Now, neoliberalism, key to space, even if they say neoliberalism, key to space. Neoliberalism is not intrinsic to space. The no root cause argument takes this out. It is thinkable for us to go to space in the future of the affirmative. Even if neoliberalism allows us to create profit, that doesn't mean that it is the only profit model, nor does it mean that there is no way to industrialize or create the ability to build a spaceship without the structure of American government that causes millions of people to be disenfranchised, to lose their voice in politics, and to be caught in the undercurrents of imperialism. They say that it solves war. Your argument is unethical because it avoids structural violence. Shapiro in 97, cartography of violence, countenance only interstate antagonism, still war, all the coding for violence between peoples and states, recognition of domestic antagonism, non-recognition of ongoing wars on the reflective acceptance, international global imaginary, let us see peaceful world, we see constructive discourse, interstate politics are absorbed in the geopolitical map of the war, and the way we regard warriors, some of this will be as time to think more others, antagonism, violence, geopolitical cartography, military establishments was continuously inspired destination, national global history, construct models, provide the conditions of history and violence and discourse to incorporate frames for determining what is alien and dangerous warfare has been accompanied by an active history writing impetus for those who wish to sustain and practice the primary role of national self-recognition. They say profit motives are key to solve the environment. It's actually the opposite. History is entirely on our side. The profit motive is what allows corporations to act like psychopaths, to dissociate entirely from the consequences of the externalities of their business decisions and just say, we can outsource it to India.
Actually, I want to take that. Cool. First question, what is the ideograph evidence, I guess, can you explain in the context of the T violation, like how it was the argument?
Yeah, so the piece of evidence is making two arguments. One, it's making the permutation of interpretations argument that I made, which is that instead of having one dominant heuristic for understanding rhetoric, that we should have a permutation of approaches, that there should be a problematization of politics as opposed to like, this is the method that you ought to use to discuss politics. The second argument that piece of evidence is making is supporting the ideograph of fiat argument that I was making above that, which is that the way we understand the concept of fiat and what it means to defend a topical laugh in debate is itself ideologically prefigured by the experiences we have when we learn debate, when we figure out for the first time when someone tells us what fiat is. We have a pre-imagined concept of that. And so the 1AC is sort of a deconstruction of that as fiat is just a tool of imagination that allows us to project our thought into the future.
So I want to talk about the permutation term again. If the perm is true, it should be a combining of things. Why does that mean that the argument that you should legalize is a bad interpretation?
Because you have a univocal understanding of what legalization means.
So there needs to be impact.
In order for us to meet your interpretation, we would also have to fiat.
I disagree, but okay. Let's talk about the stasis. How does it interact with T legalizing? It's just a question of you legalizing them. The disedge, you're oh, this happens in the future, so this doesn't link, right? How do you access stasis when there's a no link argument in the debate?
This is why I tentatively said it. I said tentatively in the process because I don't know what your disedge link is going to be yet. But the pharma disedge is not linked to the F.
Right, so the link evidence in the 1AC is pretty specific that it should remain illegal. Why is that
I
not?
would disagree.
Right, I don't understand how that is not a shifting of the stasis in the debate when it is literally a question of it being illegal in the future or not.
Because your argument makes an assumption that legality would happen a certain way. And part of our argument is a critique of the
Sure.
particular ways that happens.
If we read evidence on the farm and decide that says that weed needs to stay illegal, is that sufficient?
If you read a piece of evidence that says that weed must stay illegal, and you defend the status quo, yes.
Sure. Can we?
That evidence better be sick.
Fair enough. On the abstraction, like no link argument on the dissent, if we win, the dissent's still a impact turn to the app in the future. Is it still like a reason to vote for the dissent?
I think in order to win that argument, you would need to have the most robust and unethical defense of big pharma possible.
Well, I don't understand why that means that why the dissent would still not mean it's a bad idea in the future, right?
I mean,
like unless pharma doesn't exist in the future, why doesn't it still impact turn the app in the future?
How does it not impact? Because your specific scenario is not like big pharma good for everything. Your specific scenario is like weed causes painkillers to not be sold as much.
Sure, and that causes bioterrorism. Bioterrorism then happens in the future. Is it still bad? Like it seems like your no link argument is literally about the future. If the dissent links the app in the future, is it still bad? That's my question.
Our argument is the dissent does not link the app in the future. Nor does it link that.
Right. Yep.
The first one.
6:12. Do you also have that flashlight?
No, we put it over here.
No, it's right here.
Oh,
We
okay.
can still.
It's T and then case.
You want the mustache back? Oh my god.
Could do
One second.
Oh, I couldn't if I tried. I got white.
Alright, you want that ready?
Topicality, we're not, sorry, my camera wrong. My bad. Topicality, not going for it as an independent reason, reject the team. I'm just going to go ahead and answer the offense they made when they tried to cross the other arguments. We've never said that they need to be fiat. We just said that they needed to assume some kind of legalization policy so we can have actual links to disadvantages. This is just us trying to hedge back against the cross answer where they said things like maybe like it depends on what the data link is. We will obviously prove the data links are the impact terms on case now. The permutation, you cannot affirm the disadvantage of the case arguments because they are impact terms to the affirmative. They are both the reasons why why legalization of marijuana should not happen, or reasons why reasons why neoliberalism is a good idea, which means that you cannot combine these two things as they are exact opposites. Case. Extinction should always come first because it's a qualitatively different than any other kind of impact because it is permanent forever and therefore must be weighed but less abuse and not only kills every single living being on the planet, also damns the future beings who do not get a chance to try that is trillions of lives must be included in your decision calculus. That is abuse of Kaminsky evidence. Argument is that your imagining will lead to a world where we treat your extinction because of all the impact turns on cases because of the bioterrorism and this which means your framing is problematic. Deviantist politics should not go first, but not first. That always means that we are going to rally you to utilitarian calculus to a secondary position, which means that we secondary position, which means we will never do things to see the human species shell. And they to most important of all things, speech not only works and people underline the speech exactly speech would say one of those benefits following one in the 31 interesting number of one parts close to number of characters we ourselves without remembering their values like destroys people as personal possible distinction in second half. Now it ontologically means we cannot know anything, which also internally turns the dailiness politics argument Patterson in three ontologically choice of independent effective reflection possible logic means trying to bring about a structurally kind of any situation in the drafting the process between the person who's objective and intentional rejection like human life itself can be born as an expression of all like so right multiple cannot be no way that records and conditional human possibility now possibility there's no risk of utility in that green in any world judgment on a Christian direction like the direction green normative moral the common moral institution that insists on being about taking humans in human existence is missing consequential respect for person or against treating people in their obviously can be kind of every person as well. This is making consequential just have to after the reason that rational features can share now. The next segment I'm going to go for is realism now because yes, it takes out the affirmative, the affirmative takes the affirmative sentence that exists because evolutionary biology has been developed in the anarchist state situation, which everything right is trying to kill us means that we are never going to think that their imagining can never do anything because you cannot imagine a world without realism, or world without realism, which means that things like capital, things like neoliberalism, and neoliberalism, the violence and impact of is always going to be now because the structure is and how we follow this piece of there that it's not going to be in the card because they have conceded in the tweets. No root cause arguments. No root cause argument is not a reason why capitalism doesn't resolve those. Doesn't resolve. They need a very very specific piece of evidence in the case of capitalism key to get profit. So profit motive that that exists only in terms of capitalism. So I'll talk about in talking a little bit. Not going for the UC Berkeley arguments. Obviously doesn't apply to us since we were in impact terms of the affirmative. We win that within their imagination is a bad idea that improves you should default negative. Also that next means that the next argument there is no alternative to neoliberals. A piece of right evidence. Piece of right evidence is that definitely they're getting a credit for the argument that we have to challenge those kinds of blinders. Is blinders kind of excuse that anti-neoliberals have been using for have been using since the days of Marx. They have not been able to come up with any kind of alternative piece of Jones evidence. Jones evidence indicates that anti-global movements would always fail because we cannot think of anything. They were able to imagine a world without neoliberalism, but they were never able to actualize that world, which means that which probably proves either the impacts of the affirmative are network, or impacts of the affirmative are network, and gives us convenience for impacts on its women's thought. Marx's theories, biological fantasy, evolutionary psychology, question, you don't read the truth best. They say, constitution, the nice change of categories, scout, crucially proud, 50,000 years, their definition, the terms last year, then zero minimal, and it has a political implication, with better cells, better acts, mutual remaining opportunities, there's always dominance, seeing, keeping you up, challenge, and harmful use of your activities, zeros of figures, targets, natural scientific research by friend, neuroscience, suggests the human mind involves as well as specialized one of those judgment of transcription against property, and particular intellectual and ethnographic evidence shows undergrads from health creating station parents for the existence of function specialization, calling adaptation for trade, the key political lesson of revolutionary cultures, there is university nature student studies by chain by revolution nature, everything making humanity say biological possibility. Now, yes, it is key to getting off the rock. Piece of absolute evidence is very, very specific to indicate the profit motive we get from capitalism only is sufficient, which means even if they win that there are other kinds of profit motives that can exist in other systems that are not drive for infinite resources like capitalism or neoliberalism. How would have you do, which means those things are not sufficient was also conceded conceded that there's 100% risk of causing extinction means that there are extinction means that 1% means that 1% risk of link should always drive 1% risk of link should be sufficient impact should always drive the direction of the link, especially when they are a nebulous criticism of neoliberals. Means that criticism neoliberals means that they impact turns out that way when the usual arguments. It also causes more structural evidence, means that it turns the cases we literally would not be able to feed people anymore. The piece of evidence indicates that when a burn shot happens, it means that there are massive chunks of rock that are shot in space, which means that it blocks out the sun and causes a bunch of soot to be released in the atmosphere, which means that we cannot grow plants anymore, which means that people actually starve to death, which is probably a really bad imagination for the world. Now, additionally, the next argument is that capitalism is sufficient to solve global wars. Piece of want to see evidence in the case of resource wars, that resource wars are inevitable, where we don't have capitalism, we will because we don't have ways to deal with the need for new resource. Means that yes, it is ethical, even if they in this piece of Shapiro evidence is a response to utilitarian calculus, means that our extinction frame should always outweigh. That is a short-term time frame impact. You have compared with the space colonization, get a robbery, which means that you should prefer the impact terms. Next argument is that capitalism is self-correcting. Piece of just Roche's evidence indicates that indicates that firms are naturally going to fail if they aren't able to correct back which means that the empirical ability of the economy to recover from classes means that it is absolutely self-correcting. There are new green technology that means that it is sufficient to resolve the environment. Even with the violence against the environment argument, since we get off the rock, that argument is absolutely relevant because there's no risk of extinction impact coming from it, because we are able to avoid all that kind of stuff. Additionally, colonization is possible. Super in 10 region by Palestinian raising water provision never be enough to secure the world's ship build in adequate international centuries zero gravity Mars mission people imperial playing artificial gravity routines spacecraft black back in ancient taxes and no basis in science service. Mars is sterile. The Earth receives Martian meteorite objectives mission of sterilization that there is right death. We already got contingency choices dealt with the generation lose will be faced by the infantry Mars once modest storms. That little hazard with speed of 100 kilometers an hour on Mars exists only exerts even precious 10 kilometer breeze 10 kilometer per hour breeze on Earth. Now they conceded the next three arguments, which is why I'm going to go for them. If they get access to the Twisi argument on Twisi argument, they said there should not be new block link extensions, and obviously they don't get new 1 hour responses to arguments that are absolutely conceded. First, that capitalism is key to valuable piece of rock evidence indicates the only way that we can have any kind of leisurely, liberal living, which turns the case means that the kinds of advertisements that they're playing in the 1AC will not ever be actualized, as we cannot have those kinds of leisurely livings where we can go on the street corner of high school, really give you shit. Next we're going to see some slaughter steps, in case that there are all of our authors are hacks, because you all of our authors are hacks, because you should be very skeptical of them, because they very skeptical. Actually, I'm not going to go there. The last term I'm going to go for is a piece of cut up, which in the case of capitalism absolutely reflects that the only way that we can have actual scientific progress, new education standards, which means that the only reason why we are able to have criticism of the status quo like the affirmative has is because capitalism has allowed those kinds of things to exist, which means that you should prefer a system of neoliberalism in order to resolve the affirmative enemies.
What's the difference between capitalism and neoliberalism?
I think neoliberalism is capitalism on a more globalized scale. I mean, like, in terms of our evidence, they mean the same thing.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. Why are humans incapable of changing our thinking?
Because the piece of their evidence talks about how we were evolved in an anarchic system, i.e. there
Right, it
a lot of
says
things outside
human
that are trying to
thinking
kill us.
hasn't changed fundamentally in 50,000 years. What is the warning?
That we evolved in an anarchic system where there were a bunch of things around us that were constantly trying to kill us.
That
so
is
we
an
were
argument
forced to
about
be
what-
defensive and realist.
That is an argument about what's
That's
happened in the
like-
past. Why does
Yes.
that mean we can't change how we think in the future?
Because it's evolutionary biology means that we are set on a particular path.
What is neuroplasticity?
I'm not entirely sure.
Awesome. What is the self-correcting economies argument that you made?
I guess the piece of Desdrosh's evidence, it talks about how if firms were not self-correcting, then they would have failed empirically, like in the past, because of
Self-correcting in
possible
what
economic
regard?
what?
Self-correcting in what regard?
In terms of being able to fix the problems that capitalism has created. So I think this piece of evidence is contextualized to things like economic collapses, but it's also pretty applicable to the environment, right? The fact that we are able to create new green technologies now and like interact with the environment in a much more positive way than we did like 100 years ago.
What
probably
example would you say embodies that? Corporations doing good for the environment.
corporations doing good for the environment. There's like various alternative energy sources that are being created, like wind power and solar power. We think that things like more greener cars that
How
people
does
drive.
that balance out that the profit motive for leveling mountaintops to remove coal means that it will always be chosen?
It means that there is a profit motive for those alternative energies, so that coal is being
That
made.
profit motive is what?
The fact that people can make money off.
Right, there's more short-term profit in coal in the status quo than there is in wind power. The profit that comes
Right,
from wind is
but
larger.
there are new
How do you know
technologies
that-
that is making that change. Right, your argument would have been correct if we were having this debate 10 years ago.
Oh, so what you're saying is that knowledge does change human behavior over time.
In terms of it staying along the lines of an evolutionary, in terms of it staying along the lines of a anarchic realist society, sure.
What about choosing wind power over coal as anarchic?
What about choosing wind power over coal as anarchic? You're conflating the two arguments, right? The piece of Thayer evidence indicates that things like neoliberalism are always going to be inevitable because we always have a particular selfish need to try to survive, right? The wind power example is that capitalism taking that selfish need to create positive interaction.
Last question.
Yeah.
Why can we not imagine a world without realism, and why does realism?
Because it's embedded in our psyche.
Why does that mean we can't imagine?
Yeah, it means that we literally do not have the capabilities to do that.
We don't have the capabilities to imagine what it would be like if people weren't self-interested.
Mm-hmm.
You can't even think about what would happen if people were not selfish.
I mean, no.
You can't
The piece of their evidence indicates that because of the way that we've been developed, that is impossible.
I'm seeing. The descent.
Here's the flash screen.
We good?
The impact is exactly how you should view the dissent. All of the extensions of why extinction outweighs the reason is a viewpoint of how you should view the dissent. The only really good argument they have is that objection is only that the act happens in the future. That the act happens in the future, so it doesn't link to the dissent. But I think the dissent is still an impact term to the future. So I don't think you can win this argument. Now first to make your argument that it doesn't trade off. It doesn't trade off until the thing. It's pretty specific names. Viking and other things that it would trade off. And even if it doesn't trade off specifically with Viking, it definitely trades off with things like anti-anxiety medication, things that actually give money to the pharmaceutical industry. I'll do them all. Do most of the work like this important on the internal link work. Now the extraction argument. No, this no link argument is problematic because the answer means that the link still will happen. Still happen in the future. Any risk of bioterrorism happening? Is there reasons why you vote for you do not vote for the authorities? The reason why all of their arguments structural violence will be turned. The impact of the work specifically lower. Now they say the farmer argument doesn't link out thing is short, but it definitely says that it being legal would definitely trade off with bioterrorism sensing capabilities. Remember across when we read that card back to you, we read to every single word why will go for this baby. Have to go for this baby. Farmers industry is definitely necessary to create sensing industries and being able to cooperate with other industries to create vaccines to stop any bioterror from happening in the future. The impact part is really good to talk about how vaccinations are the only way to stop bioterror attack. It's not a question of if, but a question of when. And vaccines are the only way for us to be able to stop this argument. It's not a question, and now it's not a question of whether it will cost the question of being able to make the money enough to create vaccines. Now, even if we don't win that it totally collapses the industry, we definitely win that it creates a huge monetary trade-off, especially if it is legalized enough for individuals to be able to go in the corner and buy a bong and smoke up so they don't have to deal with their anxiety anymore. It's obviously a question of profit trade-off, which is the internal link to the sensing and internal link to the bioterrorism argument that the thing evidence is talking about. They're making an argument that the link's not in Shirley, but I am going to read more after the link here. This is O'Connor and one heat like pharmaceutical organization have the ability to get a drug thing. You wouldn't have to pay a pharmaceutical company to process it and do everything they do. And Oakshire improves legalization, causes individuals to shift to pharmaceuticals. This IPN 14 American Cannabis College, University. Maybe people are discovering that they would rather spend coffee and reach for pharmaceuticals. And here to go next, 14 legal advice came in and take recognizes the same time at the same time the year that the lab which was any principle post-marijuana legalization industry that particularly benefit from it being illegal, including pharmaceutical companies. I think they're gonna go for is this whole like no link thing because it's a question of us not collapsing. But if you are defending it a question of marijuana not being legal in the future or whenever, it still definitely links to the dissent because it's a question of whether or not it being illegal or legal would trade off with pharmaceutical companies, which we're definitely winning because they're not entering the profit internal not entering the profit internally. No profit is definitely key to vaccines.
There should be new block arguments because it's still early enough.
There should be new. Sure. There should be new block arguments because it's still early in the debate. Obviously, I have to be able to say something for 6 minutes until one and another profit. The profit argument is definitely internally reducing money means a research to create new vaccines that are ever changing. It's definitely necessary to decrease the funding, but actually would absolutely trade off with that being able to research vaccines to combat future bioterrorism or bioterrorism now. They say now bioterrorism is most definitely likely. Their evidence doesn't really assume the recent the goblet evidence that the money to talk about recent tax and capital recent bioterrorism. That's it. reason taste why transformatory ingredients are very much present market pressing, as they say. Alpha was because neoliberalism stops environmental argument, but he says now, why because extinction definitely comes first, that's next, and truancy, extinction convinces me also, neoliberalism inevitably is largely impossible to be able to stop their impacts, which is the reasons why they're literally unable to allocate anyway, because they don't have an impact they can go from some kind of way they can stop neoliberalism from messing with the environment. The dissent definitely turns cases bioterrorism will force the United States regime to resort to wild protections and max or create more racist search and siege procedures, and also more things like the illegal flight bans that from Africa approach races. The United States national obviously bioterrorism is an internal link to all of their impacts that they can't go for because neoliberalism being inevitable means any risk the dissent, whether it happens in the future or now, is the reason why you should vote on. Next, they say it's a question of being able to reclaim politics from neoliberalism, from being able to reclaim from neoliberalism. They don't have a way for specifically being able to solve for neoliberalism beside imagining that it doesn't exist, which means that the alternative, which means the distance definitely an impact turns they're imagining. It's also a question of what it's counter that indicates that small threats are important to matter. Also turns case means they don't access structural violence because it definitely turns the racism arguments they have.
Vaccines and medicines.
Yeah.
So the first one.
Is that how it is?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
That's the basis.
All right, we got 4 times.
You said 410, right?
Yep.
We're gonna do case and then the decision.
Only our older OU has given it.
Anyone not ready? Ethics should come before politics. This is the question of capability that the 2AC makes. The question of impacts is beholden to the question of what is our capability to solve those impacts. Our education in this space can only affect our daily lives so we should develop strategies that matter for us. If the question you're asking yourself is the imagination good for our political lives, irrespective of how the external political world is constructed? Daily ethics are critical to the will to preserve the earth, which is the key distinction between the affirmative and negative. All of their neoliberalism and capitalism arms rely on profit motives as a preservation to control the earth. The empirics show that those profit motives aren't enough to save things like Amazonian rainforest. Only a daily ethics towards things like individual decision making on an individual level can allow us to maintain a preservationist attitude. Now, the realism date, he's sounding a lot like Bill O'Reilly when he says your imagination experiment can't explain that, which means I don't think these realism arguments are offense to the rest of the debate argument. Second is that their arguments on neoliberalism are about a world order, and their arguments about realism are about world anarchy, which means they're contradictory, and you should be skeptical of them. Third is that neuroplasticity means that realism may have been the only thing like 2,000 years ago or whatever, but we think that in this particular space, between the 7 people in this room, we can make deliberative decisions based on what is the best daily ethical decision that we can make. The realism arguments don't answer the fact that you as a judge have the decision-making capability over these class-based issues. Next argument is the no root cause debate. He mishandles this. We're conceding your evidence, which means no matter how bad it is, we still get the claims you make. The affirmative is a proximate argument about the relationship between marijuana corporatism and neoliberalism, not a writ large argument about neoliberalism just being bad, which means we access all of our internal links, but their impacts are all about abstract assertions of ideology of capitalism and neoliberalism, and none of them are contextualized to the specifics of marijuana, which means all the case turns don't go away in the world where they don't win, where we win this no root cause argument. Now, the Occupy argument is an advantage for the affirmative. Capitalism is the cause of academic death and of social death in the academy, which means the reification of capitalism creates a self-correcting system that can only perfect the system of social death in the academy. This Occupy is critical because it makes a foundational claim about how the academy is constructed, not a secondary claim, i.e. the act would result in bad shit. This evidence is about how the academy works, how the academy takes in labor and then produces violence. We think that the daily ethics are necessary to confront this argument. Now, the group of the debate about neoliberalism, you should imagine your way out of neoliberalism. First is that even if neoliberalism is inevitable, our epistemology is inherently good. That's the question of capability. I said at the very top. Second is that neoliberalism will collapse inevitably. The logic of all of your space evidence and the logic of all of your resource wars evidence says that resources are finite. So neoliberalism as a world system is finite because it cannot expand indefinitely. Third is that your interpretation of peace and his understanding of neoliberalism is problematic. This is our Shapiro evidence that says that capitalism produces the anonymization of violence, which means that even if capitalism reduces great power wars, which it doesn't, it allows to create infinitely more subaltern violences, like in the specific instance of the Occupy evidence, which we are winning an eternal turn. Now they say the asteroid and the turns case starvation argument group this war in the affirmative does not kill profits or NASA, which means that both of these arguments are non-intrinsic disadvantages to the affirmative. Additionally, you should the war on drugs outweighs the risk of an asteroid extinction. That's an ethical decision you should make. They say you should evaluate short-term impact, but the only short-term impact is a question of how we can change our imagination in the now. All their arguments rely on long-term impact argument, or long-term impact, which means they don't access this capitalism being self-correcting. Yes, I answered this argument. It self-corrects itself to be more fascist. They say capitalism is key to value life because of leisure. This may have made sense 200 years ago. The problem is that capitalism slowly reduces leisure time, and the fact that things like the middle class shrinking, more work hours per week, all of empirics prove that capitalism reduces leisure because it extracts more surplus labor out of the system. The last argument is that capitalism is reflexive, and then he says a bunch of words like science, education. Now, capitalism allowed those things to exist. This is our criticism of neoliberal rhetoric that says that you can just throw out these flashy words like education, science, which don't actually mean anything to a capitalist, to capitalist ideology. The disadvantage. I'm going to section this debate up into a few big parts because I think that's the best for class versus that the disadvantage is unethical and does not turn the case the logic of abstract extinction scenarios of neoliberalism allows us to ignore our ethical obligation to dailiness. We think that dailiness should control the decision for how you control decisions for how you decide things, because when you walk out of that door, you are not going to be a policymaker or a big pharma executive, but you are going to be Sam Allen, who has to make decisions for the rest of their life over how you think about criminalization or how you think about process of normalization. The second big section of this debate is the no link and no trade-off arguments, which is that three arguments here. First is that the need for vaccines is inevitable, which means that if Ebola is killing everyone, the pharmaceutical companies will make the vaccine because they don't want to die. Second argument is that realism turns this argument because no one will get vaccinated outside of the 1% that can afford the vaccines that are produced. The third argument is that they don't develop the right vaccines. Using Valium profits would go to creating more effective Valium rather than going to create more effective Ebola vaccinations. Now, we have an interpretation in the 1AR, which is that 2 lines does not constitute evidence, which means that this is like the entirety of the 1AR clause, like 2 lines long. You shouldn't read them. That's bad educational practice. How the bioterror debate first is it's not gonna happen. It's not beneficial to terrorists. There's no way the ability to predict how it would be, how it would develop, or how it would grow. And empirics prove that bioterrorism is not gonna happen. We have a biopolitics disadvantage that's dropped, which turns the disadvantage, which is on background evidence, which is that specific evidence, and this is the specific evidence with the ethics disadvantage I extended on, which is that the rhetoric they use creates a change in how we act and see the politics of the government, and says the government has a priori right to challenge bioterror before dealing with things like the war on drugs, which we think is a bad ethical frame of mind. They say protectionism and flight bans would turn the case. No, what turns the case is assuming that the abstract risk of asteroid extinction or Ebola outweighs the war on drugs. Where you at?
6-10.
Anybody not ready? Their primary offense against the disadvantage is that it is an unethical thought process. Utilitarian means it is the most ethical thought process, both your daily life and your policy making. The piece of Kunitzki evidence does not respond to properly indicates that extinction is quantitatively different than either kind of impact is permanent and forever, and therefore must be made above all else. All kinds of structural violence can be reversed, but you can never reverse extinction, which means that refusing to stop it can not only kill every single living being on the planet, but also damns the future beings who not get a chance to survive, which is trillions of lives must include your decision because they conceded that conceded the dissent turns keeps make structural violence inevitable anyways because make structural violence inevitable anyways. How do you think that bioterrorist attacks would occur, and how people would die from it would be agonizing and would be agonizing, excruciating pain, which means that there is also a risk of the dissent causing structural violence, because you should go to prevent that. Even if they win their daily politics, so daily politics argument, argument is that they have a bad daily ethics, which means even if they win their frame, that you should prefer the disadvantage piece of that. Patterson evidence also indicates that extinction ontologically means that we cannot know anything anymore, which means that we cannot imagine a better world, which means that their kind of thought process is literally impossible in the world of the disadvantage, but it's not. No risk of any kind of impact the other way. The piece of green evidence indicates that indicates that utilitarianism never creates violence or unethical policies. Either those kinds of policies are inevitable because there will always be people who are disproportionately affected by society, or utilists vastly invested or this kind of things is decrease equal value to all bodies. There's no risk of any kind of their ethics disadvantage. How you should frame the rest of the debate this year. Impact questions should always drive the debate because the only reason that things matter, especially because there is not really terminal impact defense. We win that they're imagining has a chance of decimating the bioterrorism industry, and that a bioterrorist attack causes extinction. Then they said should always go out with the case. No link arguments. The first argument he makes is that there are need for vaccine is that arguments that when there's not a profit motive, it means that people are not going to want to develop those kinds of vaccines. Anyways, marijuana legalization would devastate the pharmaceutical industry, would quickly take over as a much cheaper, more effective alternative to common medicines like Advil and Prado. The industry seems to be ineffective and class, which the piece of evidence it conceded at least frame, which it's not a question of the pharmaceutical industry absolutely collapsing. It's a question of them not being able to make enough money to be able to develop new vaccines to prevent the spread of bioterrorism, which is the central internally question. Is not responded to do so. The next argument makes is that realism turns is no one else is going to get vaccine outside of 1%. Yes, the vaccine will obviously go outside 1% because people have an economic motive to do so. These people will buy the vaccine, and thus they will sell. They say they will develop the correct vaccine. There's only a risk that they do create those. Obviously that impacts the general world of your firm, which means you prefer the disadvantage to the piece of counter evidence also indicates that the piece of survey evidence also indicates that pharmaceutical companies benefit now from pot being illegal because they are able to control the drug flow and able to control price, which means the only way they're able to develop the correct vaccines right now is only develop correct vaccines through that being legal. They say the two lines of evidence doesn't mean that you doesn't make an argument fine. You should not read your evidence, but they have zero link defense other than ad homs as we are framing the link in terms of specificity for which should be sufficient. They say no bioterrorism, you can't predict when the attacks happen. There's obviously the reason why you need to have the pharmaceutical industry being create new vaccine to stop those kinds of things. Yes, it happens. Yes, cause extinction. But the evidence indicates we cannot ever contain a biological pathogen that is designed to spread throughout the entire world with our current technology. The only way to access new technologies, engineer and develop those new vaccines. The risk is 100%. The piece of Solana and Jones evidence both indicate that those impacts of those things that bioterrorist attacks are absolutely inevitable right now because terrorists have particular incentives to do so. Which means that the impact definitely happens. The biopolitics is that there's one impact to us other than us doing really neat things like really neat things. Useful obviously means the G side outweighs those things anyways. Which means that if I win the impact rating questions, right, it was what? Okay. Obviously not going for the neoliberals in terms we can see that they don't we can see that they're approximate argument not for neoliberalism writ large means that there's probably proves it is absolutely absolutely not because either they're imagining it's not especially like get a good way their argument against the imagining argument is that we should imagine a way out of neoliberals, and that's what anti-neoliberals have been trying to do for literally a century. You can see the articulation of Jones indicates the reason why previous anti-globalization movements failed is because they were not able to do anything, get out there. They were able to imagine a world without neoliberalism, but never able to actualize that world. That means that which probably proves their politics doesn't ever do anything. Politics doesn't ever do anything except for trigger impacts. The realism argument means that you're imagining you cannot do anything. You literally cannot imagine a world without realism because we have always been structurally evolved, to operate that way. The middle right argument is just an add-on. Yes, neoliberalism and realism are not contradictory. Those two things have evolved in conjunction with each other. Obviously, conjunction with each other. That decision is utilitarian. Thought process already talked about the co-option terms. When the impact terms of the when the disadvantage of the case. Obviously, this argument doesn't matter. This evidence is definitely not about us. It's about radical change to the status quo. Which obviously not the negative because we will definitely defend the status quo. Say cap causes violence. That is inevitable because neoliberalism is absolutely inevitable. Which means there's only risk of the dissent turn in the affirmative, and not the other way around.
Turns case.
It's at the top.
410.
That case would be pleased.
Are y'all also running a timer right now? This one's stopped.
Nick has his with
That's fine.
What?
15 seconds.
Okay, in the case of Big Pharma Disad. We're all good? The 1AR's capability framing argument is the lens that you should use to evaluate both impact and solvency. In order to prioritize extinction in the abstract over flesh and blood people, you must make an ultimate unethical act of distancing by denying your responsibility to the present, by saying that the particular people that you engage in politics with in the academic community that you belong to are less fundamentally important in order to alter your thinking, your life, and your vision of the future than the minute risk that a bioterrorist could come to our country and kill you as a result of pharmaceutical industries losing profits. You must ask yourself political questions that are grounded in your daily existence in order to transform the fundamental structure of the world, which is a thesis argument that the affirmative made in the 1AC that they have not yet contested. The pieces of Ware and Giroux evidence, as well as our pieces of Humphrey's evidence, indicate that the way that rhetoric has come to define the ideological political movement that exists in the status quo makes the kind of violence inevitable, makes the war on drugs a necessarily violent and exclusionary act, and the only way to transform that is from the bottom up and not the top down, because it requires an individual understanding and orientation towards the future that does not get drawn into a copacetic post-modern understanding of what weed legalization would look like, one that says that there will be corporations that pop up on the corner next to the bodega that can sell us pot, and that's fine. It's a form of leisure activity that allows us to distract ourselves from the everyday existence of America. This is a fundamentally Deleuzian political question. What does philosophy do as opposed to what can its thought accomplish? When we engage in an imaginative thought project, the 1AC ad uses it as a heuristic to transform the ethical relationships that we have towards ourselves and the world, which means that there is an intrinsic advantage to engaging in the affirmative's imaginative thought project, even if that thought project could potentially result in extinction because it transforms your relationship to American politics. He says that we have tried for 100 years to think our way out of neoliberalism, so that just means that because we haven't solved, we should throw our hands up. It's a logical fallacy that he says we should we cannot imagine our way out, but not with that attitude. You can't. It's an epistemology dissat. If you think that it's inevitable, it becomes inevitable. And the opposite is also true, that you can use a form of utopian political imagination in order to break out of the epistemic blinders that have produced the kind of thinking that tells us there is no alternative to self-interest. That is only true as long as you continue to think in a self-interested manner. It is a form of more content question. Now, he said, extend our Occupy evidence. This is the impact of the advantage to the affirmative that you weigh before the risk of the dissat, that there is fundamentally a form of neoliberal social death that exists in the academy, that they are a fundamental representation of that kind of social death, the political conservatism that uses Ebola scaremongering to tell you that you should not engage in foreign projects of political progressivism. The affirmative is a radical rupture of that frame of thought. Now, the pharma dissat, he says that util is the most ethical and extends Comiskey. Util is only ethical when it is beneficial or useful. You must fundamentally ask yourself, what is ethics, which is something that the 2NR has no answer to. How can you say util is ethical without an offensive theorization of ethics? Ethics is a question of how we relate to others and how those relations ought to be structured. It is a question of responsibility and obligation. The ought that lies in ethics is a question of how we relate to the other people that exist in our society. You have created a form of relationship that allows you to abstract the risk of extinction away from the particular responsibilities that you have to minorities who have a racist war on drugs being waged against them, or the people who the pharmaceutical industry gets addicted to Xanax and uses those profits in order to expand their business. He says bad daily ethics lead to extinction, which is an impact into our ethics arguments. This ignores our imagination solvency arguments. The affirmative not caring about your tiny overblown risk of a dissat does not mean that we treat the people around us worse. It means that we are able to transform our very concept of political agency to say that there is no value in voting for the right or the left and engaging political institutional structures in neoliberal America, because the voice of the citizen is fundamentally silent, that a revitalization of democracy is only possible in a world where we are imagining our way out of a future that is necessarily overdetermined by the inevitability of neoliberal enclosure, which allows us to engage in radical political experimental projects like growing your own marijuana as a way to resist that. Now, he says it turns the case because we can't imagine if we're all dead. LOL. I don't think that is an applicable argument. Just because we would all die in the future in the abstract does not mean that you imagining the affirmative political thought project here is a bad idea. Now, he has conceded that the demand for vaccines is inevitable. Seriously, you have not won a warrant for why Xanax and Valium trade off with flu vaccine profits. There is no piece of evidence that they've read on this question, because every single card has only one sentence that is not highlighted fully. It's a question of internal link magnitude. This debate is absolutely a question of whether you have evidence that says total collapse of the industry as a result of the act, because illegality benefiting big pharma is not the same thing as passing a law that would take away all of their profits so that they were no longer able to produce the vaccines that are necessary for the world sick. However, your next argument double turns this argument, because you have said there's a profit motive for third world medicine production, which makes absolutely no sense. Not only are you wrong about this argument, but if you were correct, it would take out all of your realism arguments. There is no self-interest for those pharmaceutical corporations to produce medicine for anyone but the top 1%, which is exactly what our argument is. You should imagine a future in which big pharma can perhaps exist. There is a world where there is medicine, but that does not rely on a fundamentally oppressive structure of society that only gives that medicine to those who can pay top dollar for it. Nothing is purely as simple as good and bad, which is why a yes-no link argument or yes-no extinction argument does not make it makes very little sense. The 1AC dislikes big pharma. We think they're neoliberal pigs who profit off of third world suffering, the poor, but we also don't think that medicine should just stop existing. This is our Hasidim argument from the 1AC. We imagine the world, but just a little bit different. It is a question of that kind of political motivation. This is like in the life of Brian, when Brian says, I hate the Romans. It evokes a sense. It is not a particular policy that he should give to the People's Front of Judea, but rather a critique of the logic of the disadvantage itself.
Debate.
Yay, debate.
Would you all send us the link in the channel?
Thanks to you.
thought this debate was quite good. Even as the decision may be more simple than we like. I voted F in this debate. To be frank, I don't think you've read a card that substantiates the link between the profit loss, and in particular the profit loss coming out of vaccine notions. Even after asking you and trying to revisit the FANG evidence, it's even hard for me to extrapolate what I would say to them, even though they don't have the evidence, and what I would say to them that responds to that question. If that makes sense. So ultimately, I conclude that bioterrorism gonna happen. We're all probably gonna die. I conclude that structural violence is happening now, and part of that's through the war on drugs and neoliberal violence and realist violence, both of which are almost certainly inevitable. I think that the imagination of the legalization of marijuana does not significantly harm or alter the way that big pharmaceuticals could address bioterrorism in terms of the vaccine. You do almost basically zero risk of that. It's just the evidence matched up to the rhetoric that you were providing. And while I give the affirmative very, very little risk in terms of understanding what the new conversation it is that they're trying to provoke, I think that opening is probably a chance for us to do some level of hedging against your very strong defense of the inevitability of neoliberalism, the inevitability of realist thought, and the inevitability of structural violence. It might open up new conversations on how we might live our lives slightly differently, to go out and act slightly differently. Maybe that does have an ethical relationship that might have some sort of tangible ethical orientation toward someone suffering in a moment. I didn't exactly, so that's the decision. Any questions, comments, concerns about the decision that itself?
That makes sense for the decision. I have like other questions that
Great.
might be answered as you go.
Okay, so I have a couple things that I didn't know exactly how to resolve. One is the inevitability debate. I didn't understand exactly what I was supposed to do between the connection between realism and neoliberalism throughout the debate from either side. I didn't know exactly what you conceptualize your imagination to do when you've kind of spotted these inevitability arguments, or what that meant. And part of it's not trying to defend something specifically, because it's opening questions, but something more tangible for me to understand what it's supposed to deal with on that matter would help. Second is I didn't really understand. I thought that you all were quite a bit ahead in sort of this utilitarian framing, and I think it would help if you add the sort of if you add a link probability coupled with impact probability in the 2 in R as you kind of did in the block. I wasn't getting that as much, and I think that might help with what I think is quite poor evidence to help insulate yourself from a judge saying that. Like, no, it doesn't really matter. They didn't do a great job testing that throughout the debate. So I didn't know quite what to do with your utilitarian frame. But even more concerning for me is that I don't know exactly what you all think ethics mean. You're like, they don't know what ethics are. I don't know what you all think ethics are, because you say you have to be ethical, and what that means is to be ethical. And as you're probably very familiar, that is not helpful in understanding what ethics might be. So I thought that was a weakness in this debate that might be able to be clarified. The Occupy evidence, I agree on both sides of the interpretation of this, that social death does kind of understand what's happening now, but I think that if you went for this piece of evidence offensively, the bottom part of it where it's like, the Academy lets you have your little conferences where you say, biopolitics is so terrible and neoliberalism's the worst, look at my little slideshow. It lets you do that, and that replicates social death. I think the piece of evidence assumes what you've done in the space to some extent, and the efficacy that it might have elsewhere. So that might be something that if you had a similar assessment about kind of the evidence quality or how you thought I might interpret the evidence quality, that might have been a way to jet some real of the 2 in R and really dig into and extrapolate what that evidence means in the context of this debate. I think it could be this kind of standalone position in some ways. And I thought the evidence at least spoke more closely to what was happening in the debate than the DA. So I'll say there, I have some more comments about the one instance of specific speeches, but any questions about content things that I was
Is how do you think we should be describing the like coupling the probability with impact probability question?
So I think if you take it back to maybe some of this, in part it's difficult because I'm not sure I would give you any risk with the way it's set up without sort of like profitability internally to vaccines charge. But a focus on, the shell evidence is like 1% risk of that magnitude. Framing that in terms of, so they've conceded 100% of the impact, they locks in the probability of these impacts. They have no evidence here to support that it wouldn't hurt. We win some risk that this would, because there's no doubt that it would trade off some with Advil, that's the bottom line. And we win some risk that if your imagination does jack with neoliberalism, it would hurt. Any chance that there's a risk in a utilitarian framework suggests always one body count means that you always have to err in that favor. The future generations argument doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me in particular, and not that they answered it in this debate, but there's also future generations that live in systemic violence, in world systemic violence.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't know exactly how to differentiate those two, perhaps, but I think that framing that I had before about bodies, one, length, chance, not saying it's great, but something means doesn't matter. The only question you have to ask is are we all pointed at? And I thought that you were doing a little bit better job of that really hardline stance in the 2 and C, and then almost rhetorically backed away a little bit in the 2 and R. And I think that you want to almost just reorient the judge's attention from parts of your evidence and towards other parts.
Okay.
So that would be perhaps one strategy. Not sure if that would get it in this debate, but it would help.
That makes sense.
When you're talking about like defining ethics better, so like in the 2AR, I tried to do a little bit more of this.
Yeah.
Do you think that the explanation I'm doing there is still shallow, or?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think you're not wrong that is the moment probably in the debate where there's the most robust discussion of what an ethical frame might be. Let me see if I can find some language we could build from. So here's the moment where you're like, particular people in the community that you belong to, less fundamental, the small risk bioterrorists would kill in the face of the profit. Ask yourself the political question of your daily life. Tell me what, now it's still not it, how should I conceive of my relationship? What makes ethics possible in that relationship or relationality with another that even makes this a first possible question?
Okay.
And why does a utilitarian frame make that understanding go away? And now I'm looking back at it, I'm like, even though I was a little bit more satisfied, or I felt like there's something more in the way, I'm not sure that I have language that really helps me to understand what ethics is. So I guess I don't have an answer to that.
I felt like.
What is the good look?
Yeah, exactly. I guess that's a robust and difficult question, but it is one that you're asking. I think
That the act is attempting to ask.
One that I wish you had more thoughts for me to.
Should we frame it more as like what is an ethical response to the corporatism of weed, rather than just what is like ethical?
Probably. I think that gets to your contextualization arguments a little bit in this daily life argument. But yeah, still, it doesn't feel like ethics is ethics in your world, and I don't know what to do with that. So I don't really have an answer to that, I guess.
I feel we can work on it.
Any other questions about that? I have a couple of comments. I really liked the 1AC, the construction and the use of a variety of artifacts and medium to start discussing this. Like that you've kind of built a map of the trajectory of the argument, has been taking it throughout the semester, gives some sort of continuity to the argument. I think it could be improved in at least in 3 kind of general ways. One is I think that you could take the time to flesh out not just ethics, but the conceptualization of the definition of what an ideograph is. You assume in this debate that all of us, we all might have some familiarity with the notion of an ideograph, but giving a moment, just as you would do in a paper at a conference, and defining your term or conceptualization of that term, I think would make the rest of the specificity tying back into that more accessible.
Awesome.
Second is concretizing or making more concrete, is probably the word I'm looking for, the implication of what you're kind of emphatically establishing as the threats on the war on terror or the war on drugs. Who are the marginalized populations? I thought that you didn't really have a defense of, or a great explanation, or a very connective way for me to understand the threats of the status quo, even as you use words like whiteness or you use words like neoliberalism. To some extent, I think that you flatten those words out, and rather than doing it so many times, maybe using some examples, some flesh to give that some sort of that ideograph.
That kind of like line about Coca-Cola meets Monsanto ethos, like that's the route you would take that.
I think that additional lines on that would.
I think the reason it kind of looks like that is because as the app has evolved, it kind of began as a like all impact argument, and now we're like, now that we've analyzed what's bad about it, let's analyze how to solve it. But we can mix the two quickly.
Yeah, and you'll need to, because this is my first tournament of the season,
Right,
So
and you
it's
haven't
like,
seen
and I haven't seen that argument. So while yes, I can imagine many things. What I'd like for the debaters to do is to give me some flesh, so that I am kind of interpreting it similarly than you. The third is that while I really enjoyed the multiple methods, I think that y'all can work on the performance of this. Sometimes there's volume going on from the speaker, and there's distraction of the text and how my orientation is going on. Sometimes the slide that you're analyzing isn't actually up yet.
Yeah.
And I think that's a level of practice that needs to go into it, and timing. But I like what you're doing. The performance development of it could use a little bit of work.
Totally.
Do you think that the text, this is something that I've thought about, the text on the slides is not necessarily worthy, or do we just need to build that synthesis better to where the text can be read?
So what I would suggest you do is you give more time for your viewers or your audience to analyze the text for themselves. So rather than speaking over every image as it comes up or sometimes before it comes up, let the audience read the text and visually, right? It's not just a text that you want me to analyze. I'm assuming there's a visual rhetoric in terms of the circulation of ideographs that you want them to analyze. So give a moment, let the audience kind of say, okay, I'm doing some of that own interpretive work, and then give your own interpretation. And I think that connection might help build the argument, and it allows your audience to sort of do that mental work that helps an argument stick with them a little bit more.
Yeah,
I don't have any evidence that that's true, but
they imagine that they've come to the conclusion themselves, and then we make the argument, and they're just like, oh yeah, I always thought that from the beginning.
I do feel
You great idea. I agree with that idea.
And do make sure that you have a defensive visual rhetoric, and sure that you, or hope that you've thought of that.
We did.
That's something to build upon. For you all, I thought that the strategy wasn't bad in terms of what we're going to do here. More emphasis, more of a dealing with structural violence, the notions of structural violence. And playing some defense on that, I think, would help. So not just no solvency, but neoliberalism is dealing with structural violence now, rather than neoliberalism helps us deal with future problems. Can help you in these sorts of impact framing debates. Second is, I thought there was maybe a misemphasis on where you needed to defend the argument. So you read another card about how a colonization of space is possible. And really, this debate is about what logic or what imagination is necessary to make that possible, in my opinion. And so, rather than reading that card, you might kind of double down on explaining what their imagination forecloses and why that forecloses it. So you might even tie it into who builds these spaceships that go to space. Well, it's only those capitalist profiteers who have the wonderful imagination that they're going to make bank off of building that rocket to get off the rock. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you can tie your rhetoric and your economic logic into almost a counter imagination that's like, no, we will give you something specific that's awesome. Here's the imagination. Here's what your daily politics should look like. Either get the hell out of the way they're going to build the rocket, or use your own capitalist imagination to build that rocket. I think that tying it in like that does give you, even if it's like it seems unnecessary, I think in this debate it would give you more rhetorical connection to the situation.
That's right. Makes sense.
Yeah. Like I said, I really enjoyed this debate. I thought that everyone did a really good job. If there were like a card that kind of tied some of these things together, I think that you all might have been in a little bit of trouble on this DEA, especially because you conceded the bioterrorism impact right at the end, which is always dangerous.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe just
Yeah, makes sense.
Cool. Great job. Yeah.
Thank you, Cindy.
Yeah.